The 2025 World Gymnastics Championships are set to take place in Jakarta, Indonesia. Well, maybe. And we've got everything you need to know about the competition. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. And today I'm joined by New Zealand's Thomson. This is episode 82, where we preview the 2025 World Gymnastics Championships. Lewis, thank you again so much for being back here. Welcome to Neutral Deductions.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this episode. I'm really excited for this Worlds, and I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, so a couple headline storylines for us to dive into. I think we have to start with the fact that maybe World Championships are not going to be happening. We are recording this as of Sunday, October 12th in the US, Monday, October 13th in New Zealand. And as of now, there is no official ruling. But we are going to dive into what exactly is happening between Indonesia and Israel and why there may not be a World Championships because of it. So, as you may have seen in the news, unless you have been hiding under a rock, the Israeli gymnastics team was not granted visas to compete at the World Gymnastics Championships. And I want to clear something up right off the bat, because I've seen a lot of people on social media saying like, oh, this is great, they're taking a stand against what's happening in Gaza. That's not what is happening here. This has nothing to do with what is happening in Gaza. This has to do with the fact that Indonesia does not recognize Israel as a state and therefore would not be issuing visas on behalf of the state of Israel or to the state of Israel. So when choosing to host a World Championships, part of the FIG statutes says that entry visas must be granted to the gymnasts and athletes and officials of all member federations. In the event that this requirement is not fulfilled, the allocation of the event would be canceled with immediate effect by the executive committee. So this is not similar to the Russian situation where Russia invaded Ukraine and therefore their athletes were banned from competing. So again, this is not referring to what is happening in Gaza right now. Rather, this is more similar to what happens with the Azerbaijan when competitions are happening in Azerbaijan, because athletes from Armenia have a very hard time getting visas or don't feel safe going to Azerbaijan. And you're holding competitions that may have Olympic implications or World Cup money implications. And so you have this whole group of people who don't feel safe or maybe cannot be granted a visa to compete there because it's not fair. It doesn't level the playing field. So that's what we're dealing with here. So the question is, okay, what is going to happen? Because the Israeli Federation has now said the FIG is not following their own statutes. So they have sent a file to CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sport, which is the overruling authority dealing with all international sport. And you may be familiar with CAS because of what happened with Jordan Chiles on floor at the Paris Olympics. That's probably the most recent time you would have heard about a CAS ruling. So the International Federation of Gymnastics has been asked to respond to this CAS filing by Monday, October 13th, we assume in European time. So rather shortly, and then CAS is expected to make a ruling. So I think there's a couple things that could happen in the situation. Again, you may be listening to this later. There may already be a ruling. You may be in the future and already know what's happening. But as of right now, here's a few things that we think could end up happening. So right underneath the assurances concerning visas, there is another article in 26.5 of the FIG rules that says, in exceptional cases, the council and or executive committee has the full power to make a decision whether the organization of an event shall continue, be held elsewhere, or be withdrawn. So some people are interpreting this to mean that because this is an exceptional situation, because it is so close to the World Championships, the FIG Executive Committee can choose to say, no, this event is going to continue. Now, I have spoken to a Swiss, an Austrian, a German, and a US lawyer about what is happening. All four of them are under the impression that that is not actually what Article 26.5 is supposed to be used for, but rather based on prima facie, or based on the first impression, the fact that all athletes are supposed to be granted visas is going to be what should be upheld, and that the exceptional cases would only refer to things like war breaking out, a tornado, hurricanes, things of that nature, because of how clear the wording is with the assurances concerning visas. So that's one aspect to consider. Another aspect to consider is the fact that there are conflicting reports about whether the Israelis were originally granted visas or no. So some articles state the Israelis were granted visas and that those visas were withdrawn. Other articles state they were never granted visas to begin with because Indonesia does not recognize Israel as a state. So then, depending on which thing is true, if the Israelis were actually granted visas, is there a loophole that the FIG can get out of because their document states the visas must be granted, not that they can't be withdrawn. So if the visas were granted, which we don't know if they were or they weren't, because again, there's conflicting evidence, is there a loophole there for the FIG, for the World Championships to continue? There is also the option that the Court of Arbitration of Sport simply cancels the event and says, these are your documents, these are your rules, there is no wiggle room. And I think that there is a decent likelihood that this happens, and I think more so than people are willing to admit, because the Court of Arbitration of Sport does not care about feelings. They don't care about the proximity of the event. This is Swiss law and Swiss rules. Like, this is a possibility. And Lewis is like grabbing his face right now to tell me, like, what does this evoke in you?
I just think it's a pretty crazy ruling that I know there's only about 3 athletes on the men's side that this would affect, and there's probably a few women's gymnasts as well that this would affect. But to have a rule in there where if something does happen and one country can't go to an event and the whole thing is just canned, I think it's a bit crazy, but I just really hope it's not cancelled because I'm looking forward to it. So
I think many people feel that way, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge how serious and how black and white their ruling is, and the fact that the Court of Arbitration of Sport could choose to go that way, right? It doesn't mean they necessarily will, but that is definitely an option. Another thing that has been thrown out by some of the lawyers I've spoken to is that the event will be allowed to continue, but the results will always have an asterisk next to it, and the results will be considered null and void. That's a potential. And of course, there's the option that it could be rescheduled or postponed, potentially like tagged on to Junior Worlds in the Philippines, potentially, with Watanabe's connections to Japan, moved to Japan. There's a lot of athletes training there right now. It's not that far of a flight. So we are following this very, very carefully, and hopefully we'll be able to report back to you soon what is going to happen with the World Championships. More news for the storylines for this World Championships. Russia is back. This is the first time really that we are seeing Russian athletes going to compete at a major international event. Of course, they had the option to get neutral status before, but that either wasn't granted to athletes or they chose not to compete because it wasn't granted to everyone. We did see something where neutral status was granted to Belarusian athletes, and some of them were able to compete last Olympic cycle. So that is something to watch for. And then third, Hashimoto Daiki is currently in a 3-way tie with Peter Sumi of Yugoslavia and Yang Wei of China for winning 2 all-around titles in a row. If he wins in Jakarta, he will sit in second place alone with 3 straight wins behind the legendary Kohei Uchimura, who of course has 6 straight wins. So those are our 3 big headlines that we are watching. So in terms of an overview of what type of competition this is going to be, Lewis, what type of competition? Is this a team, individuals? What can people expect?
This is a very different competition to normal. So usually, I would say the biggest competition to watch would be the team final at a World Championships, but every single time, 1 year after the Olympics, we have just an individual competition. So everyone here will be fighting for the all-around or individual apparatus finals rather than that full team, which makes for a really interesting worlds because usually countries really focus on that team when they're picking their athletes, but this time every single athlete has been picked with individual medals in mind. So yeah, it's a lot different.
And in terms of the equipment that people are going to be competing on, they are competing on Taishan equipment, which we haven't seen for a couple of championships. Can you talk about some of the maybe similarities and differences to some of the other top equipment makers like Spieth or Gymnova or AAI? Like, what event do you think would be potentially most impacted by it being on Taishan equipment?
Yeah, so I was actually discussing with my mum. I was trying to go through some sort of scenario on how I could explain these different like apparatus and things, but the way I would explain it to people that don't really know is it's almost like driving a different car. Like it does the same thing. It's got 4 wheels, it's got a steering wheel, but the brakes are a bit different, the accelerating's a bit different. So um on the floor might be slightly different, which can affect connections very much. Like athletes might have to really wait before they kick into that next flip. And on pommel, the leather might be a bit more round and like could be slipperier. And for rings, the way the A-frame catches your vibrations, it could be a lot slower of a swing, which can affect dismounts. And I think high bar is definitely one that high bar and floor would be the ones to watch out the most for, just because high bar can be very sensitive to the way people bounce on it, and it can throw a lot of people off because you have to be so precise when you're going for those big casinos, those big Colemans, especially those connections that we'll see a lot of at this World Championship. So definitely watch out for that high bar, and I'm sure these guys will get used to it. They've got plenty of time to train on the equipment before going out there, and I'm sure some of them have been lucky enough to even train on Taishan, knowing that they're going to compete in Jakarta.
Yeah, yeah. That's really, really interesting. I know Michael Reed, who was on the Jamaican team, and he's a current coach at the Air Force Academy. He has done several videos talking about differences of equipment, specifically on pommel horse, and how that might actually affect different skills. So if this is a topic of interest to you, I would highly recommend going and looking at his Instagram channel as well, because I think that these differences for people who didn't compete at a high level, or like I have never competed in men's gymnastics, right? It's a little difficult to understand when the gymnasts talk about the time that it takes to acclimate to the different equipment as well. And oftentimes when you're going to a big world championships or an Olympic games, you're competing on brand new equipment. And so there is a time where actually during podium training, I see this oftentimes on floor, where athletes are really trying to punch the floor to try and get the springs activated and really not want it as hard as it comes brand new.
Yeah, it's one thing that you're training on different equipment, but brand new equipment as well. Like that floor will feel very different by the end of the World Champs. So it's a lot of change that these athletes have to get used to in a short amount of time.
Well, it's a good thing that Bart Derlot will be back at the World Championships to make sure and tell the judges if there's anything wrong. Um, the other thing I do want to note about this particular World Championships is we're coming off the Olympic Games in Paris, and actually 5 of the 7 Olympic champions are returning to competition. And I think that this is something that's really special about men's gymnastics that often doesn't happen on the women's side. Not to say it can't happen, but for example, on the women's side, I believe only one of the Olympic champions is returning to compete this year, whereas on the men's side, 5 of the 7 Olympic champions are returning to compete. The only ones that are missing are Reese McClanagan, who is out due to having surgery, and then Liu Yang, who is out simply because he is choosing to prioritize the Chinese national games, not because he's not in top form. So I think that that's one of the exciting things about following men's gymnastics is you're actually often able to see the top gymnast come back year after year after year.
Neutral Deductions is your exclusive gymnastics news platform focused entirely on men's gymnastics. To show your support, please subscribe to Neutral Deductions' YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram.
So moving on to our preview, let's start with the all-around. So the person coming in with the most difficulty, I don't think this is a surprise to many people, definitely Hashimoto Daiki with a 33.2 difficulty, which is truly astounding. And what's interesting about Hashimoto is that he not only comes in with the highest difficulty, but also comes in with the highest total all-around score of the year, with the exception of Kawakami Shohei, who is not going to be competing here at this championships. So he has the highest difficulty plus the highest score in massive 85.464. So coming into this competition, there's really only 2 athletes who have broken that 85 mark. And they're both Japanese. One is the 2020 Olympic champion. The other is the 2024 Olympic champion. So from my perspective, I think that we're going to see this battle between Shinosuke and Daiki about who is going to actually be the all-around champion. And Shinosuke has never been a world all-around champion. Daiki is trying to defend his 2022 and 2023 all-around titles. And they come in with the top 5 all-around scores in the world and 9 of the top 10. So unless something disastrous happens, I think it's pretty safe to say that probably the all-around title is going to belong to them. What about you? What do you think?
I'm exactly with you there. I've got Daiki at that top spot just because he has an extra 1.6 in difficulty over Oka. But I think it's really cool that Oka's up here because at the last Olympics, it was only really between Daiki and Zhang, who was another headliner for this final. But he's really proven with all these scores throughout the year that he can really punch his way up there and definitely deserves to be in that number 1 spot for some people.
And having dropped from the 10 skills to the 8 skills seems to have really benefited him and his gymnastics quite well. Whereas with Jungbo Hung, I actually think the 10 skills was actually much more beneficial to his all-around program. And we don't really know where Jungbo Hung of China is going to fall within this ranking because he's been injured most of the year. And I don't think that we have seen him at his best yet. So it will be interesting to see if he comes in fully healthy and ready. Can he also break into that top 85 spot? And I'm not sure he's quite there yet, but that is something that I'm definitely watching. But for you, who are the other people that the people listening to this podcast should be aware of, the people fighting for bronze, maybe those dark horses? Like, who are those names?
I'm going to go top 8. I would definitely look at William Emard and Felix Dolce, the Canadian boys. They definitely have capabilities of getting up there. But as far as that top 5, like fighting for that 3rd spot, I've got Carlos Yulo, Asher Hong, and Jesse Moore as my 3. I'm really conflicted in who to choose here, but all 3 of these, like as you said, Daiki and Oka are kind of the only ones that are hitting that 85 kind of mark. And then you kind of get to the next tier of the all-arounders, and all of these guys are like capable of getting into the 83, mid 83s. But just because Australia is close to home, I'm going to put Jesse Moore in my 3rd spot.
I love when a gymnast who is like known to the very like nerdy like gymnastics people, like but not necessarily known to like the rest of the gymnastics fans, is able to grab that spot. And I feel like that's where Jesse Moore is you and I have talked about him so much, and we're like, everyone needs to know who he is and needs to know his program. So I think that's a great choice for bronze. I'm also really torn. Carlos Yulo said in an interview recently that he's really been focusing on his all-around program, not just floor and vault. So part of me like wants to choose him. Part of me is like, oh, but Asher Hong is competing in Jakarta. This is like such an NBC like fluff piece storyline, but his mom was raised in Jakarta, Indonesia, and that's where she's from. And this is the first time, assuming these championships happen, that I believe his grandparents will be able to see him compete live. And so I'm like, that I love a good storyline. And so I'm like, oh, if Asher could get on the podium and have that win in front of his, second home country or in front of his family, I think that that's a really, really special moment. So, okay, I think my final prediction, I'm going to go Hashimoto gold, Okashinosuke silver, and Carlos Yulos bronze, but I really want it to be Asher Hong.
That's fair.
And you said yours was Hashimoto, Oka, and then
Jesse.
Okay.
Gotta back my boy.
Moving on to floor exercise, Cam Nelson of the USA owns by himself the hardest routine in the world. A massive 6'3" difficulty. Opens that routine with the triple pike and triple back to back. He's actually also now created some gear that says triple on it. Definitely things to watch out for. I believe he's planning on handing out those t-shirts at the World Championships, so definitely look out for him there. And I believe he still has maybe another 10th he's potentially playing with, upgrading with in finals. So something to watch there. Now, the highest total score belongs to Madami Kazuki of Japan with a 14.833. Now, for fans watching, I think that floor is actually going to be one of the most interesting to watch because there have been some changes to the composition requirements since the start of this year, not only since the Olympics, but since the start of this year. So, Louis, what are some of the things that we may now see because the scale no longer has to exist in the routines?
Yeah, so I remember at the last World Cup, these changes had just came into place and everyone was kind of still doing their scales. But now there's a whole list of different artistic choices that you can make that will fulfill that requirement. There's you can like do some twists to your stomach to the ground. There's like some butterflies that fulfill that requirement, and there's just a lot more things that fulfill that requirement that hopefully will make this a little bit more interesting rather than seeing everybody do the exact same scale. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a little bit of diversity here. I hope these guys are going to bring some fancy snazzy moves to the floor.
Yeah, I do think the diversity is something that I'm looking forward to, but I have to say I will probably miss some of the scale fails as I personally found them high level enjoyment, to be completely honest. I think probably one of my favorite pieces of gymnastics content that came out this year was Nazar Chapirny's scale and him like panning to the Kazakhstan team, just like absolutely losing it at how bad that scale was. And like, I just find that those moments so endearing and entertaining. But yes, the scale is not going to be present in every routine. So that is something that we can look for. Now, there probably is going to be some confusion too, because if anyone has kept up with the changes, some of the new changes that have come out are about all the different corner transitions that are needed or about the dismount, like downgrade options on some of the events. Those are not taking place until 2026. So some of those changes that you've heard about are not necessarily in effect for this World Championship. So follow along and we will definitely keep you updated there. If the Israelis are able to compete, we would end up having the 2023 world floor champion with the 2024 Olympic champion, Carlos Yulo, competing. TBD if Artem Dolgopiat is going to actually be able to compete at these championships, but that would be an athlete to watch as well. Now, I feel like Luke Whitehouse has just been completely and totally unbeatable this year in terms of he won Europeans, he won university games, and I think if he won the world championships, then that's just sort of completing the trifecta and someone that is definitely top of my mind when considering floor champions. What about you?
I'm with you right there. Luke's probably one of my most confident gold placings out of all these apparatus, to be honest. He's competing a really, really hard routine, but he's been competing it for years, and like nailing it for years, back to back to back European champion. So he's definitely at my top.
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at floor, you have athletes like Minami Kazuki and Cam Nelson, who are both spectacular in their own right. Minami tends more towards the twisting skills, and maybe Cam tends more towards the flipping skills. But I think with both of them, where I see the opportunity to falter is the going out of bounds and the little hops. Whereas I feel like what Luke does a really good job of is minimizing his landing deductions. And he seems to absorb the landing a little bit better than some of the other favorites for this event. And so that's sort of where I place him. But that is not to say that, Harry Hepworth couldn't sneak in there, Minami Kazuki, Cam Nelson, etc. Carlos Yulo, again, reigning champion, and I've heard, I got an inside tip that Carlos, if he makes the floor final, is going to be upgrading his floor routine, because right now his floor routine is in that 5.7, and he probably needs to be a little bit closer to that 6.0 mark to be really, really competitive for that top spot right now. So my dark horse for this event is actually Asher Hong. I have rarely seen if he is on, and he hits every single landing. And so if he has one of those days where he is completely on, I could see him getting into that podium area. What about you? Who is your pick for gold? And then who is your dark horse for maybe podium or for gold?
I think in the same way that Asher Hong, when he's on, he can stick everything. Like I think it was at the US Champs, was it, where he almost stuck every single pass. It was amazing. I think Kazuki Minami from Japan, we've all seen him stick all his passes on his Instagram stories, and when he's on, I think he could, if he's feeling sticky, he could definitely run away with it.
Yeah, I think that would be spectacular to see, because he is definitely a fan favorite in terms of just pure excitement with his gymnastics. Moving on to pommel horse. My opinion, hardest final to medal in. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
100% agree.
And the crazy thing is, Reese McClanagan isn't even going to be at this World Championships, and it's still going to be the hardest championships to medal in. So the highest D score right now is Ihor Daishuk of Ukraine with a 6.3. Highest total score, Gabriele Targetta of Italy with a 15.166. What is it about this particular final, aside from pommel horse just being pommel horse, that makes this so hard and so competitive with so many people who could genuinely walk away with this win?
For me, this is definitely a battle of the old versus the young. There is like a whole new batch of pommel horse workers that are coming through, all like 18, 19 years old. This will be like their first world champs, and they're all scoring like 15, close to 15. And yeah, to me, it's definitely a battle between experience and youth. And yeah, I don't know who's going to win. And especially pommel horse, anyone can fall off. I'm not even sure if these guys will make it. Like some of the people that I have in my top three, I don't even know if they'll make it to the final, because that's just how pommel horse is sometimes.
I know, usually you have maybe one guy per Olympic cycle who is super, super consistent and who doesn't typically fall off. I'm thinking of like Lewis Smith, maybe a Max Whitlock, although I think Lewis was maybe even more consistent potentially. In this Olympic cycle, you've got Patty Hoops, who I don't think has fallen in competition in 2 years, Hamlet Manukian, who has maybe fallen once, maybe he's gone the entire cycle without falling. You've got several guys who are just so consistent and can hit over and over and over again. And it really does matter. One of the things I'm watching, and part of this is because I heavily follow US gymnastics, and one of the things I'm watching is the Patty Hoops versus Brandon Ding storyline, because they have different shapes. And it seems like depending on which judging panel they get in front of, they get scored differently. And I'm interested to see how this judging panel is going to interpret which form is potentially the best. And maybe you could speak a little bit better to this about the extension that Brandon brings versus the maybe slightly less extended shape that Patty brings, but it's just a more consistent shape overall, and why those get scored differently sometimes.
I think it's quite similar to Max Whitlock and Reese McClanagan. Like Max always was called out for just like piking. It wasn't really a pike in the hips, but it was just slightly more hollow. And Reese McClanagan, with his amazing extension, really showcased the differences that they can make. And yeah, sometimes it feels like Max would have been deducted on those, not pikey, but there's a difference in that clearance over Reese McClanagan. And sometimes he wouldn't be. And that's the same thing that I can see happening here with Patrick and Dang, and even some guys like Karbanov that are quite a bit taller and have that more hollow type of less clearancey type of circle.
Yeah, the same thing with Ahmed Abu Al Sood as well, is he has much more of that hollow shape, and we haven't seen as much from him this year in the World Cup circuit, but he's another one that I think could potentially get in there on the medal stand that has a little bit more of that hollow shape. So for me, I think I'm going to go with Hamlet Manukian for the win, as long as he doesn't try his named skill. His named skill really like tripped him up earlier this year. So I hope he takes that out of his routine. And I think for me, I'm always stunned when he goes for his scissors, how high his legs are and how easily he can get up to handstand in the dismount. I feel like I've never seen anything quite so spectacular. So he is my pick for the winner. What about you?
My pick, I actually did film a video yesterday saying I had Manukin in first place as well, but overnight I've now decided that I'm picking Karbanov because I'm going with the experience on this one. He's a silver medalist at the last Olympics, and he's been through this many times, and this is Manukin's first time, but this could easily go either way.
For a dark horse, I really struggled with this because there are so many athletes who could just not make it to the final because they fall off pommel horse, or they simply just get, for example, like two per country out. Like I think of Armenia, and they have, 3 really, really strong athletes who could make this final. But I think my dark horse, just because we haven't seen very much of him this year, I'm going with Ahmed Abu Al Sood, who is looking for redemption from not making the pommel horse final in Paris, but who was the bronze medal winner in 2023.
My dark horse for this one, I would have actually had him nearer on the podium, but Gabriele Taglietta from Italy, he's got multiple scores in the 15s, but at the recent Italian champs, he was hitting a 12-2, so he must have had a couple falls, and I just don't know where he's at right now since the Italian champs was really recent. So, but he's my dark horse to watch out for him. Another really young guy coming through.
Yeah, the European podium, I think the average age was 18 years old, right? That was such a young podium, and I think that podium very well could repeat at the World Championships as well. So if Gabriele was on there, that would sort of round out that very, very young podium. Moving on to still rings, I think the most important thing to note is that Liu Young is not here, and he is the 2-time reigning Olympic champion, but again, I think is probably saving up to compete at the National Games in China, which is really prestigious for Chinese athletes and the opportunity to earn a lot of money. And it's just 2 weeks after the World Championships. So that's probably why we think he is not here. For the highest D score coming in, that belongs to Courtney Tulloch of Great Britain and Donna Wittenberg of the USA. They're both tied with a 6.0 difficulty. And then the highest total score is Donna Wittenberg's 15.250, which just happened at the internal camp at Colorado Springs. So this is the event where I feel like the person with the highest D score is not necessarily the person who is going to win. I feel like on most of the other events, the D score matters so much, but how Courtney and Donnell are going about getting their difficulty up there, I just think that there's a lot of room for deductions. And I don't know if you agree or disagree with that take, but that from my perspective, I think the difficulty doesn't always equate to the execution here.
Yeah, I think that 6.0 that Courtney Tulloch posted was with a Victorian. So most of the top guys will have a Maltese where they're flat with the rings, but the Victorian is like the opposite side, which is a really, really difficult skill, and it's almost impossible to do without deductions. And I've never seen anyone do it perfectly. And to be honest, I'm sure he won't even chuck it in at this World Champs. And then of course Donnell Wittenberg with that massive triple pike dismount. He's his whole routine kind of is relying on that triple back. It really depends on how that goes, but if he can nail that triple back pike, then he could definitely be up there. But risky, risk reward.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with your analysis there, and I think that we will see someone with a very high difficulty score win, but I just am not sure that the highest difficulty score is going to win on this event. I think the person probably most likely to win this event is Lan Qingyu of China. He owns 5 or 6 of the top 10 scores internationally right now and is just incredibly consistent on this event. And I feel like he has not gotten his time to shine on still rings because often China is bringing Liu Yang and Yo Hao. But Lan Qingyu is spectacular here. He's actually quite a good all-arounder as well. But again, China often usually only brings one all-arounder. And so I'm excited for the world to get to see more of his gymnastics. And he recently put out an interview that was translated into English about what his training and preparation has been like. And he said, like everyone else, I've been exhausted from doing full routines and training lately. Some of us are pushing through injuries, others through pressure. Success is never easy. It's a painful and lengthy process. And so I had chosen him as my winner, and then I saw this interview and I was like, oh no, this does not seem to bode particularly well. And so I'm wondering if I've chosen incorrectly here. But who is your pick for winner on still rings and why?
He is actually my top pick as well. I remember seeing him at the uni games, and that was my first time ever seeing him, and I was really pleasantly surprised with just how perfect his gymnastics was, and big dismount. I think he does a double layout as well. He stuck that a couple times. Yeah, consistency, in my opinion, is what you should always go with when you're picking these predictions, and that's why he's up there for me.
I really struggled with the idea of picking a dark horse on still rings because it just feels like basically the top 8 guys are always the top 8 guys. And it comes down to, did they make sure that they were in handstand and did they make sure that they didn't fall off the dismount, and sort of like basically how things go in qualifications is how they're going to go in finals. So I actually don't really have a dark horse for this event. Do you?
Probably not so much of a dark horse, but I definitely need everyone to look out for Adam Asil from Turkey. He's like the Asher Hong of Turkey. If he sticks his double dismount on rings, you're going to see him explode with some sort of celebration, and it always brings the hype. And I love that in gymnastics, so definitely watch out for Adam Asil.
I will say that I feel like he is a photographer's dream for gymnastics because he's incredibly emotive, and I definitely know that from European championships, some of the best photos that I got were repeatedly of Adam Asil being really, really excited about his performances. For vault, there are going to be 6 athletes set to compete at this championships who have previously demonstrated that they can compete a combination 5-6, 5-2 vault. And that's Jake Jarman and Harry Hepworth of Great Britain, Huang Mingqing of China, Mahdi Al-Fadi of Iran, Shin Jae-won of Korea, and Asher Hong from the USA, with the highest total score belonging to Huang Mingqi of China with a 15.050. Now, 9 of the top 10 scores in the world belong to Jake Jarman, who has the Yanakura and the Dragulescu, and then the person who he is matched with, Artur Dovtian, actually competes a 5-2, 5-2 combination with the Dragulescu and the handspring Randy. So very interesting. Now, the thing with Artur Dovtian is is there a more consistent gymnast in the world? Like, I don't know. I think it might be him. Rarely have I ever seen an athlete who can compete right down the middle exactly as they're supposed to and stick it the majority of the time. Now, Jake's vaults are a little bit more untidy, not much, but just a little bit, but he definitely has that difficulty bump, which helps him out. But he has to watch out for Archer Dovtian, who is oftentimes going to come in and just be exceptionally clean. So if I was going to predict a winner, I would say it's going to be Jake German or Archer Dovtian, hands down, unless something crazy happens. I would have said the podium would probably be pretty well set with Nazar Chipurni probably taking the bronze spot, but he is injured. He's only going to be competing vault at this World Championships and has had a hand injury, so I'm not really sure what we're going to see from him. But of these athletes competing, who is exciting for you? Which are the other athletes that people should be watching out for?
Marty Alfati from Iran, I think he's my most exciting one. He recently just did a very new skill this year. So he does a Yurchenko onto the vault, a flick flack or back handspring onto the vault, and then a full in back out. So a double flip with a full twist. And he's the only gymnast to have ever done that. And it'll be interesting to see how it looks with a few more months training it, because the first time he ever did it still looked amazing. And I'm interested to see what it will look like here. And just watching the height he gets off the board, like people always compare him to Simone Biles at the last Olympics, and he's definitely an outlier doing some like really unique gymnastics. Definitely look out for him.
I think the thing for Madi is when comparing him to Simone, like I would say maybe a little bit more height, equally as clean in the air, but where Simone really stood out was the landing and the control, whereas sometimes Madi often will run out of his landing, which is why we don't often see him on the podium at the major championships. So I'm hoping that here he's able to put it all together where he has this huge, enormous block that is so spectacular to watch. And he has this really beautiful form. And I'm really hoping that he's getting his landings under control, because what a moment that would be for Iran as well at the World Championships. Now, Harry Hepworth has been training 2 5/6 vaults. So I don't know if we're going to see that upgrade here quite yet. I haven't had any sort of like inside tips or heard anyone talking about it, but that's something I also have in the back of my mind is, okay, are we going to see the 5/6 5/6 combination show up here? I think for Asher Hong, he definitely can medal here, but his choice of vaults leads him open to more deductions with the Risei Guang. It just oftentimes, instead of going right over the top of the table, he'll often swing his legs off to the side and he'll be a little bit offline and things of that nature. So that's something to watch for there if everyone else is really, really clean. We haven't talked about Carlos Yulo, right? Doesn't have the highest difficulty, but probably the absolute cleanest gymnast in the competition doing 2 vaults. And it will be interesting to see if he can work his way onto the podium or even come back and get that win again if the difficulty doesn't pan out for some of the other athletes. So who are your winner and dark horse for vault?
Well, for me, it was always between Jake and Arthur. And I've given the edge to Jake just because for Arthur to win, he really has to stick either one or both of his vaults, which does give Jake room to give like a step or two, like very small steps, but this could go either way for me. I wasn't sure what to do with this, but I've put Jake at number 1 for now.
You know, when I was interviewing Jake at the European Championships, because he did another one of those where he stuck his vault and had his mouth drop open, like very similar to 2023 World. And he was like, I've got to stop doing that. Like, I've got to stop showing people that I'm shocked when I stick this vault. And so that's always something that I'm looking forward to. Personally, I enjoy it, like seeing the emotion from an athlete's face being like, oh my gosh, like I just did this incredible gymnastics and it did shock me. And I understand why you wouldn't necessarily want to show that you're shocked by that. But as someone covering the sport, it's something that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I've seen that video go viral like so many different times since it's happened. I think it should be quite actually every time keep doing it. Make it bigger and bigger reaction every time, I think.
I think those are the moments where you're able as a spectator or as someone in the media to sort of grab on and attach to a storyline and a personality. And I feel like in gymnastics, there maybe isn't as much room to show personality as there is in other sports. And so again, it's something I really enjoy. And so I would want to see him and every athlete do their best and also see their reaction about doing their best, whether that's surprise or assurance. Moving on to parallel bars, the highest difficulty in the world belongs to Yo Hao and Zhou Jingyuan. Yo is not going to be competing at these championships. So Zhou Jingyuan showed a 6'3" earlier this year, but that routine actually didn't pan out that well for him. Some of his routines in the 5'9" range are actually what are scoring his typical beautiful 9.0 execution that we tend to see. And he does have the highest score in the world with a 15.566. I would say that this is the event that is the most predictable in terms of winners. Basically, if Zhou Jingyuan shows up, he's winning. There have been a handful of exceptions. 2019 World Championships, he sat his to pelt in qualifications and then went on to do the most beautiful parallel bar routine I've ever seen in the team final there. I think one of the Asian championships recently, he also didn't win, but it's very, very, very rare. So if he's showing up, most likely he's winning. So let's kind of, do you have any disagreement with that?
No, I haven't disagreed with that for 5, 6, 7 years at this point. I think the gymnastics world is in complete agreement with that. He's kind of the one gymnast where when everyone talks about complete mastery of an apparatus, Zhou Jingyuan on P-bars is where you go to.
I think for me, it's also one of the routines that I think makes maybe the biggest argument for having like bonus points, because I think that there are people who do things like front 1.25s and Bavzars beautifully, and they absolutely meet every requirement laid out in the code of points. The person who I have in my dark horse, Tsunogai Tamaharu, is one of them. But Zhou is just like so much higher, so much more than what you think the human body is capable of. And I'm like, that's where they should allow bonus points.
It's like instead of having like a Bavzar worth an E, it almost needs to be like worth an E.5 or something. Like not quite an F, but it needs something else.
Yeah. I still am amazed how he does not like have his like so many shoulder injuries from doing the front 1.25 to long hang. And I'm like, and it's quiet. Like that's the thing on parallel bars is like you expect when someone has that much height that it's going to be such a loud landing on the bar, and it's so quiet and in so much control. And I'm like, what sort of magic are you using? So it's a routine I look forward to every year. As I mentioned, my dark horse is Tsunogai Tamaharu. Interestingly, he has not been doing any double flipping skills on the bar, which I feel like were more incentivized in this Olympic cycle. And his routine is very just like smooth and connected. Whereas I feel like with a lot of the double flipping elements, oftentimes it's very interesting work, but it does sometimes get a little static and in one place at one time. But it's a beautiful routine, really, really well executed. And I think the thing that really stands out for me with him is often on his dismount. The way that he releases gives him so much height and so much room to spot the landing that he often does very well there.
For my dark horse for parallel bars, I'm going to go with Oka Shinosuke. He's just one of those gymnasts that you have him up there for the all-around, but he can sneak his way into so many different finals, and no one had him to win as much as he did at the last Olympics. But he got a bronze on parallel bars, a gold on high bar. So definitely watch out for him on this parallel bars.
Yeah, I think one other name I want to throw in there is Angel Barajas, who kind of stunned the world at the Olympic Games last year on high bar. But he's kind of come into his own on parallel bars this year as well. He's been competing a 6'1". He's had, I would say his routine has been a little bit all over the place. maybe not as consistent in some of the domestic competitions, but recently scored a 15.033 at the Paris World Cup in qualifying. And he's one that I just kind of have my eye on of like, is he going to show up and is he going to be another surprise for people? And then I think I would be really remiss if we did not talk about Ferhat Arican of Turkey, who has been, won medals on this event. The interesting thing about Ferhat is he often scores really well and better than I always think he should score, but it's consistent. The judges really like his gymnastics, and he is someone who is always going to be right in that mix if anyone else is going to falter. Okay. Moving on to high bar, the highest you score in the world, a massive 6.7 from Tong Hung of Taiwan. I can't believe I'm saying that. I didn't think anyone was going to compete or that was quite that hard. And then he also has the highest total score with a 15.233. Now, this is an event where I also think the highest D score and the person coming in with the highest score in the world is actually maybe not my favorite to win the event. What I have typically seen from Tong is that when he goes to do his routines at major competitions like World Olympics, it seems like maybe some sort of pressure gets to him and he is not able to perform up to his best. And so I would say based on that history, that makes him not my favorite for this event. What about you?
I think he's still my favorite for this event. That 6.7 is just a ridiculous number, and I'm sure he will compete it as well. He's too many 15s to not put him at the top, I think. And also he's got a fun routine. He's probably going to be the only Wallstrom that we're going to see. So where the gymnasts throw themselves over the bar with a full twist as well. And he's connecting it from another difficult element. So he's got a very fun routine. Probably just depends if he can stay on and how well that triple back goes for him as well if he competes that.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe how high bar was the event that benefited the most from the downgrade from 10 skills to 8 skills? Because so many of the other events we're seeing maybe lower difficulty across the board. And in high bar, we're not really seeing that. So can you explain how the composition requirements are keeping the difficulty scores quite high on this event?
Yeah, so in the past, when there was 10 skills, people always had probably another Stolder or another B element in there. But now that they don't have to have those in there, they're just going, you kind of have to pull out some ridiculous gymnastics to beat everyone else. And that's kind of what everyone's doing. And there's also been changes to the connection bonuses you can get as well. And I'm looking at these lists and like Chai Han Tang, he's doing 2 ridiculous connections. He's also doing a Liukin connection. And Daiki's doing a Liukin connection. And Anil Barajas is doing a Casina Coleman. And there's just so many crazy connections. And of course, that dismount bonus that you get in this code, it's probably the easiest to get a higher dismount on here compared to other apparatus, I'd say, which means we will be seeing a lot more triple backs and a few triple pikes even, which will be very exciting.
I think this is the event where I'm expecting the most chaos to happen. It's the event that I think we could see people on the podium who are not necessarily expected to be there. Like throughout this podcast, right, we've talked a lot about athletes from China, athletes from Japan, athletes from the US, athletes from Great Britain, these who are bringing really, really strong athletes. But in high bar, you do end up having a couple of guys from, let's say, maybe not as strong countries overall who are going to potentially be very competitive here. We have Jessie Moore, who we talked about for the all-around Milad Karimi from Kazakhstan, someone like Carlo Mancini from Italy, someone like, you said the Canadians, you were really looking forward to their gymnastics. Felix Dulce said in an interview with Inside Gymnastics, like, I do not want to leave these championships without a medal. I think probably his best medal chance is here on high bar. There are so many places, especially when guys are trying to build this difficulty, where they have so much room to fall off because of these huge connections. And I think we're going to see some sort of upset either in the win or just for the podium as well. And I'm very much looking forward to this competition.
Yeah, I feel like this is the balance beam for men's gymnastics, and it's really hard to even say who's going to make it to the final. And to do a clean routine to make it to the final and then do another one to win a spot on the podium, I think is going to be so difficult here. But I really hope we have a nice clean final, because I feel like it's been a while since we've had a nice high bar final.
And I think we would be absolutely remiss if we did not talk about Brody Malone himself in here. So Brody is coming in 2022 World High Bar Champion, who is competing the second most difficult routine for sure with a 6.5 here. I have been told that he can go up to a 6.7. And so I'll be interested to see, like, is he going to play that game? Like, is he going to play the 6.5 routine and then, 6.7 for the final, or just maybe see how does Tung Chao Hung do if he makes this final, and things of that nature. So I actually am going to pick Hashimoto as my favorite, because I feel also like when Hashimoto wins all around, he does do well in high bar as well. And so I'm going with Hashimoto for my pick for the routine. Dark horse, maybe Milad Karimi. I don't know. It's so hard. I'm gonna go Milad Karimi for my dark horse. What about you? So you said Tong for your win. Who's your dark horse?
Okay, I've got a dark horse, but other two people I want to mention is Joe Fraser. We haven't really seen too much of him on the international stage, but he does have a big routine, and he could definitely come out with something massive. And then also Anyal Barajas with those two ridiculous connections in that same routine. I can't like say enough how ridiculous it is. But for me, I'm gonna put Jesse Moore in there again. He's got a triple connection in this routine. So he does a stoop half connected to a Piatti, connected to a Ginger. And I don't know how many triple connections we're gonna see at this World Champs. So for me, it's really exciting, and he has the scoring potential to be out there. So he's my dark horse.
I think maybe one last name we do need to mention is Heath Thorpe for potential to make the final. He is probably the gymnast I get the request for the most information on. Like, people in the community just seem to love his gymnastics, and he opens with really different gymnastics in a way that we often, his routine composition is much different, but he has been able to perform fairly cleanly and get over that 14 mark so far. So I think he's potentially someone to look for to potentially make that final. I do think, man, the benchmark to make the high bar final, I almost think is going to be like 14, 14.3, 14.4. Is that even too high or too low?
I think it depends on the day, but it could definitely get right up there, definitely.
Just to wrap up this podcast, let's talk about a few other like cool or unique skills that we're looking for. Maybe people that we haven't highlighted throughout as maybe being medal favorites, but people that we just really enjoy watching their gymnastics, maybe new and upcoming names. So for you, who are the pieces of gymnastics that you are looking forward to that maybe aren't the very, very, very top medal contenders?
I think actually one thing that people should look out for is with that new rule change next year, there's less of an incentive for dismounts. And this could be a very special World Champs where this ruling is only going to be for this World Champs where dismounts are heavily incentivized. So everyone's going to be seeing a lot of triple pikes at this World Champs compared to the last year. Or the last Olympics, I can only think of one gymnast, Noah Kovita of Belgium, doing his triple back pike off high bar,
bar.
but there's a lot of triple pikes at this one. There's 3 just from America. So if you're watching, definitely be excited for the dismounts because I'm not sure what they're going to look like next year.
Yeah, I think for me, a few athletes just in particular who I really enjoy their gymnastics or people who I think are up and comers who maybe don't necessarily fit into that top podium discussion yet. So I really enjoy a lot of the Swiss athletes gymnastics. I think that Noe Seifert just has really interesting and pretty gymnastics, specifically on parallel bars. So he's an athlete that I think is always just kind of like right there on the cusp, who I enjoy watching. There is an up-and-comer on the British team for Pommel horse who, from what I've been told, just has this really, really strong head on his shoulders, is able to compete kind of like cool as a cucumber. He's had some pretty outstanding scores this year with a 14.950 at the London Open, and that's Alex Hulsen Cash. I would say maybe just the tiniest step below the people who I think are probably going to be on the podium, but he's a name that I think a lot of people don't know and probably should be acquainted with. And then for the all-around, we mentioned Adam Asil in terms of still rings, but we didn't really mention him in terms of the all-around competition. But he did win the European Championships earlier this year, and I think is someone that, if they are on their game, could also maybe sneak into that conversation as well.
For me, I want to shout out my New Zealand boys. Misha's he could make it. He could make a P-bar final. Misha's got some pretty big difficulty on parallel bars, and I know some of the guys like Logan, Keegan. It's their first world champs, so good luck, boys. And I also made a website for this world champs where you can make your own predictions, and it should be really fun. Go to my Instagram, go anywhere to get the link. The more people that do it, the more stats we have, and the more interesting this will be. Like, we can see where everyone has the all-around final at, and right now Daiki's right at the top of that. So the more people that put their submissions in, the more interesting this will be. But that's all for me.
So here at Neutral Deductions, we are going to be doing a recap of what happens in qualifications, and then we'll do a probably 20 to 30 minute podcast after men's all-around final to keep you updated there. And then we'll do a full recap, including event finals after the final event final is done. So make sure you stay tuned here. We are so thankful for all of the support that we've gotten this year. So if you are able to financially support us, thank you so much to Jeffrey for your $250 support. That really is meaningful and helpful. We have a photographer on site in Jakarta, and so that just helps us be able to send them to cover the meet there. If you're unable to support us financially, giving us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts also really helps. Subscribing on YouTube definitely helps because we are able to get a little bit of money there. So any way that you can help support this podcast and support men's gymnastics is incredibly helpful. If you would like to financially support us, you can support us via PayPal or on Stripe, and the link is at every article at neutraldeductions.com and in the show notes. If you have questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email us at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.